Hi, Letizia. Welcome to the What's Your Next podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So happy to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so I'm the author of A Killer Kind of Romance. I am from Italy, although I live in Sweden. Prior to writing romance books, I studied criminology. So I ended up doing something completely different. I'm kind of happy it worked out that way, honestly.
So, what kind of criminology did you do? Because there's different types of crime. There's white collar, which I do work in that area, in that field. But there is also like the crimes, the true crimes that we hear, the murders and the things that happen. So, what kind of crimes do you focus
I
on?
focused on white collar and specifically on environmental crimes.
Gosh, I love this. I do healthcare
I
crimes. Yeah, so it's a fun thing because it's like people don't think about it, like, but there's actually crimes here, and they're just as fascinating to investigate.
And they often look victimless, but they
Yes,
actually make way more victims than
yes,
many violent.
yes. It feels like victim. Like people are like, "Oh, this doesn't hurt anyone." I was like, "Oh, it can hurt millions of people, and it can raise your rates. It can hurt your environment. It can hurt like pollution. There's things that happen that can actually affect you in the bottom line for money and like your environmental take on like how you interact with the world. Yes.
Exactly, entire communities as well.
Yeah. Awesome. So talk to us about your romance journey. How did you get started from going from criminology to being a romance author?
Right. So actually, I've always read a ton of romance books when I was younger. I stopped at some point in favor of TV and Friends and all those things that teenagers love more
Yeah.
than books. And then I ended up working as an editor for an author who was translating their books in Italian. So I was looking at their Italian translations and I fell back in love with the genre. So then I started reading again and I figured I have a couple of ideas. Let me try. I failed brutally until I found the right idea. And then I never stopped since.
Yeah, and you've been writing rom-coms, which I love, but your journey, you were an intern in trad. So how was the journey from coming from indie author to trad published author?
It was great. Difficult in some ways because you pass from being kind of like an entrepreneur to being just a small part in a much bigger machine. But at the same time, you get the support that you don't get as an indie author from your publisher. So it's been different. And I would love to continue also the indie side of things because I think like hybrid is definitely the way. But I love it. I love working with a publisher, definitely.
Awesome. All right, let's talk about A Killer Kind of Romance by You, which is a criminal aficionado podcaster, has to host a romance podcast, but there's some murders happening. So we get a little bit of mystery, a little bit of true crime space. We got a really interesting meet cute or meet interesting bet that's happening. Talk to us about the elevator pitch about this romance.
Yes, the book is about Scarlett Moore, who is a crime fiction podcaster who is asked by her boss to also take on the romance podcast. And she's definitely not happy about that because she does not know or like romance. She's kind of snobbish about it, actually. At the same time, in her small town, these murders start happening. And that they kind of resemble the books that she discusses on her podcast. If that were not enough, there is her neighbor and the childhood crush who mysteriously disappeared 5 years prior to this, who is suddenly back in town and he's hiding a few things. And she starts wondering if he could be behind these crimes.
Yes. So this book's ended with a happily ever after. So just don't be worried. It feels like a little bit like a thriller because we do get the serial killer, the crimes
Right.
being and stuff, but at the same time, it feels happily ever after. So all is well in the world. If you're a
Absolutely.
scaredy cat, this book actually will be okay for you. You know.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
what was your favorite part about researching and writing this book? Because you do have this component of mystery, thriller element along with the romance beats. Because every chapter starts with a romance beat or a specific thing that it talks about.
Right. So I think the most interesting part was actually figuring out how to balance these two things because you don't want one to overpower the other. You don't want the romance to be more than the mystery or the mystery to take over the romance. Um, but actually, I've always been told that I'm good at revealing pieces of information at the right time to kind of build up to a reveal. So that ended up being like my favorite part. And like sometimes you think that comedy or romance doesn't really belong with thriller, but the danger of death and all these like kind of heavier themes actually go really well with heightened emotions. So with romance and comedy is kind of the way that we cope with these like darker themes. So I think the mix turns out to be like really pleasant actually.
I think I really enjoy this. I would consider it like a dark rom-com because it does have some gory elements, but there's actually like a lot of comedic. I think Scarlett's journey to romance was helpful to see like this comedic elements of her. First of all, she's I don't want to do this at all, and then actually finding the romance beats in her own personal life
Right,
as as trying to figure out like this mystery part.
right.
It mesh of someone who likes a rom com but wants a little bit more darker, like a good entry point to darker stuff.
Yeah, it's not exactly a dark rom-com, more like a murder, you know.
Yeah, like a thriller
Exactly.
rom com,
Exactly. Exactly. But yeah, that was definitely fun. Like writing how she passes from being like an absolute romance hater and, as I said, kind of snobbish to falling in love with romance was definitely my favorite arc to write. And when she does finally admit that she now loves romance, that is kind of like my love letter to romance. I'm not a romance snob. I will inhale anything that is romance. So fun for me to write this kind of like change in her when she talks about how she feels about romance when the podcast kind of gets taken away from her. That's my favorite quote in the whole book. I absolutely love
Yeah.
it.
Yes. Talk to us about writing this book in terms, did you plot it or did you pants your way? Were you surprised of the twists and turns or you're like,
Oh
I
my God,
plan
I am not a plotter. I will write and then rewrite and then change and then rewrite again. Definitely a pantser all the way through. I kind of had an idea of who I wanted it to be to the bad guy in the scenario,
yeah.
but that also sort of changed as I was writing it. The way it all unfolds changed. The role of the cat, which is extremely important in the book, also came about as I wrote. So definitely a pantser all the way through.
All right. So, listeners, the book comes out this week. So make sure you buy it or get an audiobook, ebook, paperback. It is a beautiful paperback, by the way. The cover is beautiful. That's A Killer Kind of Romance by Letizia Lorini. All right. So, we're going to talk some book recommendations. What kind of books do you tend to read?
Will read anything. I definitely read more rom-com style
Yeah.
books rather than deeply emotional romance with a lot of trauma. And I want to laugh. That's what I want to do when I write and when I read. But I will read almost anything. This year, my highlights, oh my gosh, I really loved The Brave and the Reckless by Dylan Dyer. I thought it
Yes.
was brilliant. I'm not super big on like cowboy romance,
Yeah.
but this was amazing. She did it in such a brilliant way with the theme park. I absolutely recommend it 100%. Another highlight was Hawks and Kisses by my friend Elodie Colliard, which is a small town romance with fake dating elements. And he's a florist. Just the sweetest book, very wholesome. The small town vibes are just perfect. Loved it. What else? Breen Weaver. Absolutely love anything she publishes. Absolutely love the beginning to this new series. Cannot wait for number two. Yeah, these I think are my top three books of the year. Also, Elliot
You'll,
Fletcher. I don't
yes.
know if you, yeah, those are, her series is amazing. I loved Whiskey Business. I loved Scotch on the Rocks. If it's Scottish romance, that's just perfection.
Yes. And you also love Poison Ivy, which I read and love, by Ava Rainey. I actually discovered the biotech dealers the same way that you probably discovered them. which is a trilogy of brown villagers who are falling in love. And we got the Heir, the Spare, and the Charmer, I think it's a third book. But
Yes.
then Ivy is Max and Hall meets Rory Gilmore, Logan vibes. Like we got
Perfect.
perfection.
Perfection. I'm a big Logan stan, so I was like,
Yeah.
yes, sold immediately.
Yeah. It is so good. That
Yeah,
book was just like perfection. I listened to it as an
perfection.
audio, it's duet, and it's done so well because
I
that
didn't listen yet.
similar to your book, it has a mystery. So there's a running mystery that they're trying to solve together, which is kind of I have to appreciate from your book, and even Poison Ivy, is that there's an external conflict. There's like a group project that they're working on. As
Right.
opposed to having to just do I appreciate sometimes romance, like contemporary romance, where it's like the relationship and the stuff, but sometimes you need like something else.
Right. Yes. Some shenanigans from the outside, throwing wrenches in their plans. Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Tell us where you can find you on that.
You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Substack. And you can find me on my website, letizialorini.com. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Thank you, Letizia, for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the What to Read Next. For more book lists, cozy reads, and library tips, visit the whattoreadnextblog.com. Your next great read might be waiting there.